So one of the issues I have when I get called to a welfare case is I don't go to them very often. So I've got to be honest, it makes me really nervous. So I'm hoping I can pick your brains. Now, you live and breathe welfare cases. You've also had to go to court.
A couple of times.
Yeah, and make statements, which is not an easy job, I know. So a couple of the questions that first of all spring to mind for me, when I get that call saying, can I come to the welfare case, who's it likely to be of? Who's going to be making that call?
More often than not, it'll be a welfare inspector. So either someone from one of the welfare organisations, Walters Welfare, Red Wings, for example, or more likely, probably an RSPCA inspector who has received a complaint about a horse that they have concerns about.
Okay. And when I want to charge out there, and particularly if they said it was in a bad way, but when I get there, I'm always a bit confused. So if there is just, say, one of the welfare officers there from an organisation, how much power do they have? Can I just go examine the horse? Because presumably the owner might not be there, or...
Yeah, well, obviously it's really important in these situations that we do things following the correct legal process, and that's going to depend on which country you're in as well, because the RSPCA don't actually have powers under the Animal Welfare Act, so only nominated local authority inspectors or the police have the powers to enforce the Animal Welfare Act. So in England and Wales you'll need a police inspector or a designated local authority person with you in order to be able to enter a premises. So yeah, that's really important.
So that would be the local council?
That you can't just go onto a premises and examine the horse with the RSPCA. They don't have the powers of entry to be able to allow you to do that. So that's really important. It's a little bit different in Scotland. So the SSPCA do have more powers under the Animal Welfare Act. But I think the main thing is, if you're unsure about anything, it's best to voice a concern rather than just ploughing ahead, and that way no mistakes are made that cost the case further down the line.
Yeah, I was going to say, so sometimes it's the mistakes you make in the early stage that could get a case
more often than
not go through court.
More often than not it'll be a technicality. By the stage that you're being called in, the animal's usually being assessed by someone that's already got quite a lot of experience in the area, there probably is a concern with the animal, and how you act and the evidence you gather can definitely have a big impact on whether or not the case is robust enough to take to court for a prosecution if need be.
So I've got there, and obviously I'm aware that you do a clinical exam, and I've been told, like the RSPCA, they've got various pro forma sort of clinical exam forms, and presumably the SSPCA and other authorities, they all have their own sort of
definitely. So most of them do, but I would definitely always say, if you don't have a form for whatever reason, just make sure that everything is really clearly detailed, and that you detail time, dates. It's really worth keeping logs from the very beginning anyway for your own records, so even like what time you have received a phone call, who phoned you, all of those kind of details.
From the get-go.
What time you arrived, so that when you go to write your statement you have all of the information necessary for writing your statement. So it just makes it loads easier, because I don't know, if like me, I can barely remember what I did yesterday, so by the time I've left the case there's no way I can remember what time I've arrived if I haven't written it down. So it's really good to document absolutely everything, and just to take a step back when you do arrive and take a few minutes just to do that, record who's on the scene, where the location is, those kind of things. Wouldn't have thought to do that.
And then what is good quality evidence? Because I know that I've heard yourself and Nick and Nicola all talk about getting the right evidence for court, and I know when you've asked the rest of us to maybe photograph a horse, we have to do it in certain ways. So what would make good quality evidence, and what extra bits?
So it's really important that you gather the relevant samples. So that might be blood samples, it might be fecal samples, and that's really going to be guided by your clinical exam. So you're looking to gather evidence that's going to support your claims of suffering, so whatever conditions you found on clinical exam you then want to back up with those samples. It's really really important that you do sample handling correctly, so making sure that that the samples are in the correct tubes, everything's labelled correctly, and that they are then processed in a way that's not going to lead to any questions about the process of processing them as well. So you want to make sure that you're using labs that have fully calibrated machinery and things like that, so if you're running them through blood machines and things. So yeah, so make sure that if you are running samples, it's probably better to send them to an external lab that has that certification, so that if there are any questions regarding the samples, the lab will be the ones called into question to stand up and give evidence for the process.
Obviously your sample handling, making sure that you don't delay getting them sent away.
And continuity of evidence as well, so making sure that they're not rolling around in the back of someone else's car for several days as well is really important. So making sure that you send them straight to either deliver them at the lab or send them straight to the lab, ideally recorded delivery, so that you continue that chain of evidence.
How about photos and that sort of thing?
So photos are really important. I think visual evidence, so photos and videos are really good, and they're really good memory prompts for you as well for remembering when you're writing a statement. I think these days you can take photos on pretty much anything, so it's just really important that they're time and date stamped from an evidence point of view, which most electronic equipment that takes photos now
So a mobile phone?
Yeah, I mean, ideally I would say it would be really good to have a camera with a dedicated memory card. So if you do a lot of casework, it's really handy to have one, so that you can have a memory card. It has all of the photos on it, and you can then submit that as your evidence.
So it's specific to the case?
Yeah, specific to the case, it makes life a little bit easier, and then if it is challenged, then they're all the original photos on the original memory card. But most of the time, if you don't have a camera with you, it's absolutely fine to take photos and videos on your mobile phone. It's just obviously a case of making sure that you can definitely certify that those photos haven't been tampered with, or if they have been tampered with, that they are accompanied by a statement to explain why they've been tampered with and why they've been changed.
You mentioned videos. Why in particular would you find those?
Yeah, so videos are really useful when you're looking at behavioural evidence of suffering. So by that I mean like what's its demeanour like? Is it showing any abnormal behaviours? Is it lame? Is it quidding? Is it having problems eating? All those kind of things are really hard to capture in a photo, but obviously really easy to capture nicely in a video, so that everyone can see exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, so you just presumably, if you're there on your own, get the inspector or someone to sort of move the horse about. I mean, it's a daft thing to say, but presumably they are allowed to catch up the horse and walk it about for you.
Yeah, so once the police are on site, they can give you the power to fully examine the horse in whatever way you need to.
As long as the right people are on site.
Exactly. And then the other thing that's really important is that you, if you're taking photos and video, that you have something in the photo or the video that identifies that animal as the case animal. So it's really handy to have a laminated piece of A4 paper and a whiteboard pen, so that you can just write the case number of the animal and the date and maybe the time as well onto the piece of paper, and then just make sure it's in view while you're taking photos.
So even if you think the horse looks quite distinctive, you need that there.
Yeah, it's always really good to have that as well. And make it really easy to identify. So say you're taking photos of feet, for example, just have a piece of paper with a picture that says which foot you're taking as well. Exactly.
Yeah, so that's a good point, because once you've got the close up, you're not gonna.
No, it's not always what it's attached. And again, you think at the time it's really memorable, but later on it becomes a bit more fuzzy.
Whose shoe is this?
Yeah, exactly.
That's me. One of my big worries, my big fears is it just feels a huge amount of responsibility, because you kind of feel you're there, and I suppose I panic, because what if I said, in my opinion, this horse needs removal from the site for treatment? What if I thought that, but later on we found out in actual fact it was under the care of the vet, we just hadn't got hold of the vet, and I don't know, it just feels quite weighty responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely, and it definitely is, but I think it's really important to remember that we're there to give an opinion on the welfare of the animal, and that alone really. We're not there to be the judge, jury and executioner.
Right.
And part of the legal process is a full investigation as to the circumstances of how it's arisen. So I think we perhaps take on too much responsibility in that department, and actually the horse can be returned to the owner at any point during the process.
Right.
And the RSPCA will make full efforts to make sure they can get hold of the owner as soon as possible. They've probably already tried to contact or find an owner before they've even phoned, unless it's a dire emergency. So absolutely, even if the animal is removed at that time because you've certified it, that's not to say that it can't go back if we discover that circumstances permit that. You can only work with the information.
So I have to go on what I see at that moment on that day.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if we can't get hold of, say, the owner's vet, and there is no other explanation for, what we see on that day, then that's all I can act off.
Yeah.
It's my clinical exam and my opinion on that day. So is it my responsibility to try and get hold of whose responsibility is it to try and get hold of their vet, assuming you find them? And maybe they're telling you they have a vet.
So if the owners have the right to have their vet present as well, to have the animal examined if they want, and the RSPCA will always offer that option as well if the owners are there. Their vet might come and examine the animal at a later date if a prosecution is going forward, so the expert for the defence might also come and examine and gather their own evidence as well. So I think it's important to remember your clinical exam at this point is gathering evidence.
Just on that day, and what you say, and that's your responsibility, and rather than the wider. So, and also, what are my options? Like, presumably, there's more to it than just, it looks fine to me, or I need to seize it. What about the grey areas where you think, if only they just done that, it would have been okay?
Absolutely. And I think there are a few different options, and it depends on the whole situation, whether or not you feel how much you feel the animal is suffering, whether it is suffering, whether it isn't, whether its needs are being met or not. And whether that is causing it to suffer. Because as well as removal, you can also perhaps discuss with the RS maybe leaving an improvement notice and giving the owner an opportunity to rectify some of the problems that you found. So you can have a conversation with the RSPCA about, or whoever you're with, about that and kind of time frames of what you would expect, or how quickly or not you want the animal to be maybe seen by a farrier or a vet, or have its teeth checked, or whatever you think the issue is. So absolutely, and that's a really good way to proceed in situations where you think that it can be rectified, and the animal isn't going to suffer in the meantime. Obviously, that gives the owner every benefit of the doubt in terms of being able to rectify the problem themselves, and it also doesn't prevent a revisit later on to double check that has in fact happened, and if it hasn't happened or the situation's deteriorated, then the animal can always be removed at a later date still. So.
Brilliant. And then I suppose lastly, and after this conversation, you'll be delighted to know I'm going to stay on the clinical side and leave the welfare cases to you guys. But no, joking aside, I do now feel a lot better about approaching a case. I feel I actually would know what to do and to stand back, and I think I'd know to actually just write everything down and keep calm. Take lots of deep breaths and think it's not a rush.
Not panic.
Don't panic. And I'm collecting evidence for the court, and it's the court that are making up their mind.
Absolutely.
So I'm not ending the world for anybody, I'm just doing my best buy the horse, my opinion, on that day. Okay. Have you got any final top tips for me?
No, I think really you just said it. It's just to keep calm and follow the process. And it can be a bit overwhelming, especially if you're not used to it, and especially when it comes to knowing all of the forms and all of the bits of paper and all the jargon that go with it as well. But essentially, I think if you just boil it down to you're just there to give an opinion on the welfare of that animal and whether or not it's suffering, and that's what you're there to certify. And then all that you then do is you just need to gather your evidence to support your opinion. So it's not really any different to seeing any other
just
horse.
Just being called out to see a horse, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's just going like, it would just be the same as an owner going, I'm a bit worried about my horse, can you come and sit? So basically, if you feel competent as a horse vet to do a physical clinical exam, absolutely, and just record your facts,
and just record your facts, and that's all you're doing really. So the only other thing that you probably on top of that want to do is just make sure that you take in lots of details about the environment, which you don't necessarily, you probably do it but you don't record it when you're seeing clinical cases. It's just thinking actually, are the needs of the environment being met? Do they have food and water? What's it like underfoot? Is there any other hazardous things in the area? Are there any other horses on the premises as well that might or might not need to be that through? So those are the kind of,
can you get out on the road?
Exactly. Is there any debris in the field that's likely to cause injuries, things like that? Because those are really good things to record at the time, because again they're the things that further down the line that you might not remember so well. That's
been really, really helpful. I can't promise I won't give you a call afterwards to see what you think with how I did. No, that's lovely. Thank you for your time today, Roxane.
No worries. Thank you.